Welcome and good evening to this night's Ask Your Herb Doctor, the third Friday of the month. As always, every month, it's December the 19th, 2025. My name's Andrew Murray.
Good evening. My name's Sarah Johannesson Murray. Welcome to tonight's show.
So you're listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor on KMUD Garberville 91.1 FM and on the web at www.kmud.org. We're also live streaming this program to our Western Botanical Medicine YouTube channel, so you can listen live right now on our channel by searching Western Botanical Medicine in the search bar on the YouTube and click on the live stream. Tonight's radio show is a wrap-up of the last several months' discourse on male health, reproductive health and physiological hormone health from a male perspective. So we're going to wrap that up this evening, quickly cover the last part of Dr. Pete's stance on the entire scenario. And just to rewind, I listened very quickly today. I was looking at the rest of tonight's show outline and just getting up to speed again with some of the facts that Dr. Pete had brought out, because it's just so counterintuitive and definitely clashes with the mainstream idea of what causes, for example, benign prostatic hypertrophy. Anyway, so I was listening to a 2020 coronavirus show that we did with Dr. Pete, one of the very first ones. This was January 2020, and just how right on he was from the very beginning, quoting people like Wolfgang Wodarg, several of the other people that were just shouting from the rooftops about how crazy what was going on, despite numbers that did not at all seem to be alarming. And in fact, it was only when tons more testing was done and all the rapid tests were quickly issued that a greater cohort of people were tested, that actually the numbers came down to pretty normal mortality figures. In the early days, they were pushing the narrative of the death and suffering, and it was just an awful disease that we all had to be protected from and locked down and isolated from. And obviously, they did a pretty good job of crashing the economies worldwide and getting control of a lot of people. And to this day, there's still plenty of argument about whether or not this vaccine, this mRNA vaccine, was useful. And I would say that it wasn't. I would say there's still lots of sequelae coming from it. That is very much a huge experiment. But anyway, so I was listening to the beginning of the show there in January 2020 and listened to Dr. P and all of the evidence that he was bringing out about all the numbers, the statistics, the prominent people, scientists and researchers that were speaking out against it, and just reminding myself that what we hear typically is just not always the way it is. And so he was always very supportive and encouraging of people to do their own research. And I think now more than ever there's a greater access to information, but obviously that information again is unfiltered. So you have to be a little careful and discerning which direction you go in when you want to research a topic, because even something as quote unquote all-knowing as the sum total knowledge of the universe has been sucked up by the various pre-trained transformers, whether it's Elon Musk's or it's OpenAI's or it's Google's, doesn't really matter. They've sucked up the quote-unquote some knowledge of humanity and recapitulate it and produce it as evidence. So when you want to take a look at something like benign prostatic hypertrophy, which is what we're going to wrap up tonight's show on, obviously the mainstream opinion and model is very different. If you look at a regular question, something like ChatGPT about benign prostatic hypertrophy, and you say what causes it, what's the drivers, how do you mitigate it, it comes up with a standard standard textbook description of it, and it's not right, it's wrong. And so when you say, well, what was Dr. Pete's view of it? And it gives you a completely different perspective of it, and equally valid, and it makes you think then at this point in time, well, actually, what knowledge is the correct knowledge? Okay, and it's at that point you have to start going down the rabbit hole and start looking and questioning where the data's coming from, who's behind the data, who's published it, and without getting conspiracy theorist about it all, I think we own enough conspiracy theories to understand that from Mel Gibson's perspective, conspiracy theories totally exist. So anyway, it's just to say that not everything that you see is the way it is, and so just like the Wizard of Oz, behind the blanket, you just take a deeper look, because again, a bit like the Matrix, and Keanu Reeves' kind of groundbreaking debut there, the red pill, which one do you want, the red pill or the blue pill? So without further ado, I'll carry on this evening, and we'll look at DHT and testosterone and aromatase and benign prostatic hypertrophy, and give you both perspectives. So what I'm going to share in terms of the dialogue I'm going to come out with is a kind of, on the one side it's the mainstream medical drug pharma pushing type explanation, and on the other side it's the Dr. Pete question the science, where's it come from, who's published it, vested interests, who's making money from it, and actually this is the way it is, and then see the actual research that's been done on animal models that have been done. And if you want to look and use an alternative or artificial intelligence platform to question that, I mean, you can, like I said, you can use Musk's or OpenAI's or ChatGPT or whoever. Or put that in your parameter that you want them to cover what it was Dr. Pete discussed and how it's relevant, and you will indeed find it aligning with that. So
another thing that's interesting, when you search on these AI platforms, if you just ask them a question, you have to preface the question with, according to strict mathematical probability and scientific research. You have to preface them and logic, instead of just saying, does this exist? Does this happen? Because if you question them like that, they'll have to give you the common narrative. And so the common narrative for benign prostatic hypertrophy is that, it's caused by an elevated level of DHT, and, has a different view than what could actually be going on with it. But if you ask these AI models, they will give you the common consensus. And if you want the science, then you have to specify that in the parameters when you're asking the question.
Okay, so it's definitely got a place in terms of widening our understanding of the way and the why things are the way they are. And I truly think from an altruistic perspective of humanity is mainly okay, that actually it's a valuable tool that can really help us. And yes, of course, there are always bad actors and other vested interests who want to steer it in a particular way to win the arms race for AI. And that's always been the case ever since the wheel turned things around for people moving things from place to place. So let's just hope and continue to support that creative and altruistic benefit that AI can truly bring us. So let's turn our attention then to the kind of question of prostatic hypertrophy in males. It's fairly common. I think the numbers are 50 to 60% of males over the age of 60 will have some form of prostatic hypertrophy, and the number increases with increasing age. So it's definitely something to be aware of. So let's just take a look again. The mainstream view, right? This is doctors and pharma. Their mainstream view is essentially that DHT, which is synthesized in the prostate and the epididymis, testes, skin, hair follicles, etc., So it's synthesized in the prostate then, for want of the description of benign prostatic hypertrophy, and via the enzyme 5-alpha reductase then. So it converts testosterone to DHT. Now, it binds strongly to androgen receptors in the prostate tissue. Therefore, DHT is thought to stimulate prostate growth. Hence, 5-alpha reductase inhibitors like finasteride are used to shrink the prostate in benign prostatic hypertrophy. So that's a kind of medical narrative. DHT is the problem. It's produced in the prostate via 5-alpha reductase. It binds to androgen receptors, and therefore, because there's lots of DHT there, it's the cause of hypertrophy, swelling, benign swelling of the prostate with compression of the urethra that passes through it, strangulating the urine outflow, as it were, so producing all of those symptoms that beset older males, some older males, not everyone, obviously, but, urinary difficulties, starting and stopping, dribbling, etc., getting up constantly during the night to urinate very small amounts. And we'll explain here why DHT is not the problem. So Dr. Pete would always say that DHT is not the cause of benign prostatic hypertrophy, but estrogen is. Now, estrogen, not DHT, causes the growth of the prostate. DHT is protective. That was always his stance. He argued that estrogen promotes prostatic hyperplasia, not DHT, and that the prostate is an estrogen-sensitive organ, and estrogen rises with age in men as metabolism slows. So estrogen dominant states correlate more with prostate growth than DHT levels do. And we'll get into the facts here just to describe these different pertinent points. Now, anti-androgen drugs like finasteride, which is what the mainstream medical model would have you taking, disrupt protective DHT, which may increase estrogen dominance and long-term metabolic stress. Now, DHT, as we've mentioned in the previous shows when we've outlined male health and those hormones that are part and parcel of males in general, DHT is not aromatizable. So we've talked about aromatase and aromatase inhibitors in the context of nettle root, for example, which is an excellent anti-aromatase herb. It works in several different ways. So it has this function of blocking the conversion of testosterone to estrogen, which is the main problem with testosterone. So whilst physiological quantities of testosterone are very necessary and important for male health, for building muscle and for secondary male characteristics, facial hair, muscle growth, hoarse voice, etc., masculinity in general, most people tend to think of testosterone as the thing that defines a male from a female. Even though females have testosterone, males rather have estrogen too, but it's not the main driver. It shouldn't be the main driver. So nettle root then is an aromatase inhibitor, so it blocks the conversion to estradiol. So if you take testosterone and you use nettle root, you'll retain more of it as testosterone because you're blocking that enzyme that would have it otherwise converted to estradiol, which is a problem, which is why there's kind of, Dr. Pete was never into steroids, he was never into bodybuilding, but it was so weird that he had such a huge bodybuilding following because many of the substances that he was promoting, the tenets of good health and energy production, were what people looking to grow bigger muscles were wanting. They wanted good advice for diets that would grow bigger muscles and proteins, and and those substances that promote muscle growth and testosterone increase so that they could build more muscle. But obviously at the same time they had to understand that you don't want a lot of free testosterone in the absence of any aromatase blocking activity, because then that person was more subject to the conversion to estrogen, and they'd have more problems in the end because they'd have more substrate in which to convert. So the first thing that nettle root will do is it will block aromatase, and the second thing is it has a modulating effect on sex hormone binding globulin. So the sting in nettle roots, particularly the lignans that they contain, can bind to sex hormone binding globulin, and this is a protein that binds to sex hormones, including testosterone. So when testosterone is bound to sex hormone binding globulin, it becomes inactive, meaning it cannot exert its biological effects. So interfering with the binding of testosterone to this compound, sex hormone binding globulin, stinging nettle root may lead to an increased level of free, unbound testosterone in the body, which is the form available for use by the body's tissues. So, just to say again, that Dr. Pete's counterpoint to DHT not being the cause of prostatic hypertrophy was that estrogen promotes it. It promotes hyperplasia. He always said that estrogen was a cancer promoter. Estrogen was definitely involved in rapidly dividing cells, promoted rapid division of cells, increased water retention, decreased cell energy, and all of these things were promoters of cancer. And that the prostate is an estrogen-sensitive organ, that estrogen rises with age in men as metabolism slows. And the whole slowing metabolism thing in males, when they start gaining more visceral fat and they start to become obese, is that fat in its own right is estrogenic. So not only does a male start to lose their natural testosterone production, not only that, are they losing the battle in converting or preventing the conversion of testosterone to estradiol, but the very fat that's making them obese and slowing their body's chemistry down and slowing their energetic vitality down is also pushing them towards more estrogen. So he said that obviously the estrogen dominant state correlates more with prostate growth than DHT levels did. And anti-androgen drugs like finasteride disrupt the protective DHT, which may increase estrogen dominance and long-term metabolic stress. So, as I said, DHT is not aromatizable. You cannot push DHT into a different molecule. So there are end-of-chain substances which are no longer converted any further. They're either excreted as they are, or those levels remain, at which point they are either utilized or excreted. So be aware that in physiology, for example, with the steroid hormones, if you look at a biochemical map of steroidogenesis, how steroids are produced in the body, if you look at that, it typically begins with cholesterol. Again, cholesterol gets a bad rap because mainstream science wants to tell you that cholesterol is intimately involved in atheroma formation, but it's absolutely not true. It's a very, very necessary compound which is used to clip all of the further molecules of which testosterone and DHT and estradiol and pregnenolone and progesterone are part of. Go ahead.
How do you feel about statins, and do you feel statins are overprescribed, and how does that affect downstream stuff?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a good question, for sure. It's widely prescribed, but statins definitely have their place in causing dementia later on as a kind of long-term sequelae. Dr. Pete was passionately against statins. In terms of using statins for cholesterol control, it's absolutely not the best thing to do. There's definitely, and again, it depends on the person. I've definitely seen people whose cholesterol's come down from 270s down to the 200s by exercise, okay? Exercise and substances like psyllium seeds, these things actually remove a little cholesterol from the bowel. So promoting...
psyllium husks.
Psyllium husks, yeah. So promoting the transit through the bowel of these substances so that you don't reabsorb the natural cholesterol that you find. So not only are you going to block the cholesterol from being absorbed, you're going to promote its excretion. Exercise naturally, because it's increasing your metabolism, works to decrease cholesterol. So I have had people who've managed to get cholesterol down fairly significantly without the use of any drugs. And I've also had some unfortunately stubborn, and it's funny because it seems to be non-obese 130-pound women that seem to have some fairly stubborn cholesterol that through even herb mitigation does not successfully bring their cholesterol down. And yet other people, males who have high cholesterol, don't seem to have that problem. I think there's some part and parcel of testosterone and muscle mass that actually goes to lower cholesterol in a patient. So that would be interesting to see that borne out with facts, and if you did a study on the numbers of people with hypercholesterolemia, males versus females, and the age group that we're looking at postmenopausal females, or we're looking at young men. Statins are definitely not the thing that I would ever recommend. I think if somebody had stubbornly high cholesterol and high triglycerides, there's probably much better ways of doing it.
Yeah, and Dr. Pete would talk about statins in the form of they might show a better or a lower cholesterol on the blood work, but how they're actually working at the cellular level, to simplify it terribly, I'm sorry here, but they pick up the cholesterol molecule and deposit it in cells, so it's not circulating in the bloodstream. And when you have your blood test, it doesn't show up. And they have a plethora of side effects that range from dementia to impotence to sluggish liver function, and it just goes on. And there's so many reported side effects, and it's not even fixing the problem of the high cholesterol. Cholesterol is made in the liver, and when we're younger, we convert it from cholesterol into the youth hormones. As we age, that conversion slows down and becomes more inefficient, I should say, so that you have less youth hormones, and that's part of the reason you age. And youth hormones are things like pregnenolone, progesterone, DHEA. And if your liver's healthy, it can keep converting the cholesterol into these youth hormones. But what happens with time is, as that liver becomes less healthy and you're aging, that conversion doesn't happen. So the cholesterol piles up, it backs up, and that levels elevate. And so when you get your blood drawn, you have these higher levels of cholesterol. Meanwhile, dietary factors can influence the level of cholesterol your liver's making. Not that what you eat increases your cholesterol, but what you're eating irritates your liver, and your liver makes more cholesterol to try to help be more anti-inflammatory. So when they've taken apart arteries, the Japanese did a study where they take the blocked artery and they peel off a cholesterol plaque. They thought, it's cholesterol that's clogging the arteries. Let's peel it off, like when they do the autopsy. And underneath that cholesterol plaque, it's like a Band-Aid, there's rancid vegetable oil and iron, oxidized iron particles.
The byproducts. Yeah.
And that's oxidized. So it's free radical reaction, oxidizes these PUFAs, the polyunsaturated fatty acid oils, and they deposit on the inside of the arteries, and they cause such a free radical oxidative reaction that the body says, we have to get this under control. Let's stop it. Cholesterol is like a waxy kind of substance. It's like a plaque that goes over that highly reactive problem that's tearing the inside of the arterioles and the arteries up, and the body stops it with cholesterol. So stress, poor diet, all sorts of things can cause the liver to not do this conversion properly and elevate the cholesterol. And statins don't fix that problem. They just take the cholesterol and deposit it in other cells in the body, and that is not the way to take care of the problem.
Okay, you're listening to Ask Your Herb, Dr. KMUD Galville, 91.1 FM from 7:30 till the end of the show, 8 o'clock. You're invited to call in with questions. Number here is 707-923-3911. So, so I left off talking about DHT not being aromatizable. So that means this major advantage with this is that you get basically a clean androgen, free of estrogenic side effects. So when testosterone is in the body and it's converted into estradiol, which it can be in a kind of biphasic way, what you get is things like water retention, and these are kind of estrogen basic symptoms. Water retention, gynecomastia, which is kind of male breasts. As males get older and more obese, they start growing breast tissue, and that's purely driven by the estrogen. And then prolactin elevation. So you take a blood test from a male with, even if they don't have gynecomastia, but you take a blood test from a male who's maybe 50 or 60, has got a fairly large gut or fairly large amounts of fat, and you get their prolactin tested, it's typically higher than regular males. And then also a lot of emotional kind of liability, with estrogen in males. Okay, so as I said then, Dr. Pete, he favoured DHT precisely because it resists this conversion to estrogen, supporting a masculine endocrine profile without tipping the estrogen axis. Now, DHT supports metabolism and opposes stress hormones. This is again another for advocating DHT. Now, DHT, like progesterone and pregnenolone, was seen by Dr. Pete as a protective steroid. He said it enhances oxidative metabolism, it antagonizes cortisol, serotonin, prolactin, and estrogen, and it improved libido, muscle tone, mental clarity, and mitochondrial efficiency as well. So the powerhouse of the cells benefit from DHT. Now, if you want to look at any evidence that Dr. Pete cited or paralleled, prostate enlargement correlates with age-related estrogen dominance, not with DHT levels. Now, finasteride suppresses DHT but increases estradiol, which may worsen the underlying hormonal imbalance. And animal studies, and if we get into it later on, I've got some animal studies even from the 80s that were done with DHT and prostate enlargement. Animal studies and histological findings show that estrogen can induce prostatic growth even in the absence of androgens, and that DHT has even been shown in some models to inhibit the estrogen-driven growth of prostate tissue. So we've mentioned before in the past, and unfortunately it is very difficult to get hold of it, but Andractim is the product, and in Belgium, the last time we were able to secure it, that was where it was being manufactured, and it's basically a transdermal gel, a DHT gel, typically used in men with benign prostatic hypertrophy, but who had low libido, estrogen dominance, high prolactin, poor energy, male breasts, and that DHT could restore this androgenic tone while blocking further estrogenic burden, because again it can't be aromatized. Okay, so to continue on, if you're a male and you've got benign prostatic hypertrophy and you're thinking of going to your doctor, and I tell you now the doctor's going to want to give you finasteride, this would be my advice, because if you read the science, this is what you can find. Even if you want to start checking out an artificial intelligence source, and you basically, the tenet that you're going to ask it to give you the answer is going to be based on pure science, logic, and you want to see the science behind the argument that DHT is actually protective for prostatic tissue, then this would be the advice. So basically avoid finasteride or dutasteride. As an aging male, you don't want that, because this is going to increase your estrogen testosterone ratio and weaken your metabolism. You want to favor DHT wherever possible, and see if you can get DHT, and thyroid as well. Now, thyroid support will also improve your resistance to any conversion to estrogen. It will lower your estrogen burden generally, because it's supporting your metabolic rate, and directly it can also reverse this benign prostatic hypertrophy physiology. So the underlying physiology behind it can be driven back in the right direction with good thyroid hormone. And then liver detoxification is another good point, because as Sarah was saying, your liver ultimately is responsible for producing a lot of different substances, but it's also responsible for clearing wastes. And as we get older, if we're not careful with our thyroid starting to decrease in its activity, our metabolism is going to decrease, and our fat is going to increase, and fat's going to predispose us to estrogen, and that's going to slow us down further. So supporting liver detoxification is really very important to keep the liver working. And the main hormones that Dr. Pete was very keen on, progesterone, pregnenolone, these two directly oppose estrogen, as well as dopamine enhancers. Now, because dopamine will suppress prolactin and estrogen, hence some of the reason dopamine is used as a treatment.
Well, and also Vitex. We've mentioned Vitex
Right.
earlier in the 5-part series of male health, but we mentioned Vitex, which is Vitex agnus castus. It's chaste tree berry. It's a Mediterranean plant. And men can use the berries, and it can be made as a tea or a tincture. The tincture dose is very low, so you don't want to overdo it if you're drinking tea from chaste tree berries or Vitex agnus castus. But that can really help lower high levels of prolactin in women as well as men. It's one of the most powerful herbs for treating that prolactin. And just back to what you were saying about the liver and the estrogen levels rising due to decreased liver function. I didn't mention it earlier, but Andrew touched on if your thyroid hormone isn't adequate because your liver is not working well, then that also can compound the cholesterol issue and give you an excess of estrogen in relation to your testosterone levels and your DHT levels. And just a little side point about the thyroid and the liver is that our gland makes about 4 parts of T4 and 1 part of T3, our thyroid gland in our neck. But it relies on the liver to convert the T4 into T3 because T4 itself is not active physiologically. It's a building block for the liver to convert into T3. And T3 is the active hormone that our bodies and our cells use to help our cells take up oxygen. So if your liver is struggling and your cholesterol is elevated, is it because your liver is damaged, or is it because your thyroid's not getting converted? Because it has to convert in the liver, and if the liver doesn't have enough T3, which is where the T3 comes from, is the liver, then it doesn't work properly either. So we're a complex system, and everything has to be working just right. And if it's not, then we age, which we all age anyway, so we just try our best.
Okay, so you should be looking to do this essentially then is a kind of non-drug approach to it, supporting liver detox systems in the body, so glutathione and things like milk thistle, other liver bitters, things that will stimulate your liver to produce bile, things that will support and enhance regeneration of liver cells, so specifically things like silymarin from milk thistle seed. And then the progesterone and pregnenolone, these are good building blocks. And then dopamine enhancers to suppress prolactin. So this would be, in the absence of DHT as a prescription by your doctor, if they are not able to or don't see the logic in that, then these are things that you could do to try and reduce your estrogenic burden. Obviously, you can look to block the conversion of testosterone yourself into estrogen by using aromatase inhibitors. And then at that point in time, you would hope that you would favor conversion of testosterone into DHT, and that DHT their level could rise sufficiently enough to prevent the estradiol-driven inflammatory response that your prostate's going through. Okay, so 7:34, KMUD Garberville, 91.1 FM. You're listening to Ask Your Herb Doctor. If there are any people out there who want to call in with any questions related to male health and the physiology of testosterone and DHT and prostatic hypertrophy, or any other questions, 707-923-3911. So if you want, just to recap then, if you want to boost your own DHT without driving estrogen up via testosterone's aromatization, then the strategy should aim to increase DHT specifically via 5-alpha reductase. I came across I didn't have a lot of time to look into it, but if you hear me out, you may want to take a look at this yourself. Butea superba is a plant that comes from Thailand. This is one of those few things that is, quote unquote, part and parcel of DHT manufacture, or can increase DHT. Sorghum as well, I think, was a substance or a basic substrate upon which that could enhance DHT production. Now, there are obviously things that are multifactorial, part and parcel of the enzyme, that you can use to support building the enzyme in the first place. So zinc. Zinc's very important. Creatine is important. Now, nicotine, interestingly enough, Dr. Pete had quite a few good things to say about nicotine, not smoking cigarettes, but the actual substance nicotine. And now you could do this potentially, from a patch, or I'm not advocating you chew tobacco, but you could get some transdermal way of using nicotine. You could, in fact, make an extract of it, a tincture. We've grown tobacco in the past and made ethanol extracts of it. You could use nicotine to inhibit DHT's breakdown to 3-alpha-diol. So this does happen. And nicotine can actually inhibit that. So you could actually end up with slightly higher levels of DHT than if you just didn't do anything, because it will inhibit the breakdown of it. And then niacinamide, B3, is a cofactor for NADPH, and NADPH is needed for 5-alpha reductase as well. So there's a couple of things there that can be done outside of physiologically getting DHT. Again, I mentioned preventing excessive conversion of testosterone to estradiol via aromatase inhibition, and nettle root is a good example of that. Chrysin is also another example of that. And then, as we've said, you can support hepatic clearance of estrogen and suppress prolactin and serotonin. Now, dopamine agonists inhibit prolactin. Then enhance your thyroid and your metabolic rate. So in males, definitely building muscle is a number one good way of staying healthy. I mean, we're supposed to have muscle. Muscle does many other things than just lift weights around. It's extremely good fat burning. It drives our thyroid, it supports thyroid. It's a energetic ATP driven process by which we work, and that work is done by muscle. And muscle itself is very metabolically stimulating, so you can burn a lot of calories. When you have a larger muscle mass, you will burn more calories, producing more ATP for energy, and that whole thing is a self-sustaining cycle of energy production rather than energy wasting and dissolution, which is what obesity and estrogen dominance tends to produce downstream in men especially.
And muscle building directly suppresses cortisol levels, right. Mm-hmm. And cortisol is involved with immune suppression, and it's supposed to be used for, your body is supposed to have it just in quick bursts for anti-inflammatory effects. But what can happen is people are so inflamed and are inflamed for so many years, and their cortisol levels just remain high. But that, like Anders said, involves dissolution of the bone, the brain, the heart. Cortisol eats you, basically, to keep your blood sugar high. But I did want to mention other aromatase inhibitors from the diet. Orange peel is very high in naringin, mm-hmm. and that is really good for blocking aromatase. And also well-cooked button mushrooms are also aromatase inhibitors that you can get in your diet. So this time of year you could make...
anti-cancer.
And anti-cancer. Well, I mean, estrogen's carcinogenic, so anything that's blocking estrogen will be anti-cancer. And right now, this time of year, oranges are in season, and it's a little hard to eat orange peel, but you can boil. You can eat your orange, and you can boil the peel and make marmalade, or you can boil the peel and candy it and dry it out. So there's other ways to eat orange peel if you don't want marmalade.
Good.
Not too many ways, just maybe candied peel and marmalade.
That reminds me, we need to place an order for a case of Seville's before we know it. It'll be January and February, and they'll be out of season because there's a very small window for getting Seville.
I think it's February that they're available.
You probably book your case now.
Andrew likes his bitter orange Seville marmalade.
Okay, so you make a bunch.
It's a 3-day process, and we make that every year. But I actually like making marmalade from tangerines. I think the Pixie tangerines from Ojai are my favorite. And that marmalade I like. It's lighter and it's not as bitter. He likes the bitter Seville orange.
I had incredible lime marmalade. Do limes have the naringin?
I think all citrus peel has that naringin. And
Could you set one aside to use for a premium during the next pledge drive when you have a talk show?
Yes, maybe. When we make some more.
We still have about six quart.
Well, don't give them away until you have your next batch made. I'm not asking you to.
I think. Well, when's the next?
What I'm saying is, I think we're going to make it to the next batch quite easily.
Oh, but we should give away a fresh batch, anyways, right?
Okay.
Does marmalade get better with time?
It darkens because I don't put any citric acid it has a lot of natural citric acid, but it does darken. Anyhow, we are at 7:40 here.
Okay. Excuse me.
Hey, do you want some water?
No, I don't. Okay, so nutrients and herbs then that can support the conversion then of testosterone to DHT, which is what you want. Saturated fat, and this is where Dr. Pete's kind of rationale comes into play, especially coconut oil and ghee, boosts 5-alpha reductase activity. Okay, and polyunsaturates obviously are going to block it and promote estrogen. Zinc, as I mentioned, it's an essential cofactor, favors DHT production over aromatase.
And it's that time of year for shellfish, and shellfish is loaded with all sorts of liver healthy minerals.
Heavy metals, but they don't.
No, minerals.
Actually,
I was going to say liver healthy
metals.
minerals like selenium, zinc, iodine.
Okay, and then magnesium, which supports steroidogenesis and enzyme function. And then creatine, I mentioned that. It increases DHT levels in human studies. Tonkat Ali, or Eurycoma longifolia, does have some modest 5-alpha reductase stimulation. So that's Tonkat Ali. We did mention Tonkat Ali in the beginning of the show. So. And D-aspartic acid supports testicular androgen output, and it may bias DHT slightly. Okay, so you want to suppress aromatase activity to prevent the conversion of testosterone into estradiol, and you can block or limit that with natural agents. Vitamin E. So Dr. Pete again mentioned vitamin E quite regularly. Mixed tocopherols then. This has an anti-aromatase activity in its own right. So getting good quality vitamin E in your diet has an anti-aromatase action as well as antioxidant, obviously, for which it is a antioxidant, and it supports your liver. I mentioned chrysin then again, this is a flavonoid aromatase inhibitor, and chrysin is actually pulled out of passion flower. There are other sources of it, but again, if you wanted to use it, it's not particularly well absorbed. It's a little bit like the whole paradox between turmeric, and it's excellent as an anti-inflammatory, etc., but it's poorly absorbed, which is why you can significantly enhance the availability of curcumin if you want to mix it with piperine, which is a black pepper extract. So very small amounts of black pepper will significantly enhance the bioavailability. And I think this is some of the reason why when we were studying herbal medicine back in the early 1990s, capsicum, chili pepper was nearly always added to formulas, even if somebody wasn't complaining of circulatory deficiency or being cold or something like that, or sluggish circulation. The fact that the capsicum has another kind of adjunctive effect, a pro-stimulatory effect of the other herbs, and will increase their availability just in the same way that something like chrysin would be absorbed if you were going to use DMSO. So, there's always some way of getting around things. So you find this wonderful natural substance, but you say, oh, we can barely absorb it, so well, forget that. But then you go, no, you know what? You can maybe use this topically, and then you think, okay, well, if I'm going to use it topically, how's it going to get past the lipid bilayer? Which, if it's an oily substance, is not a problem. But if it's not particularly oily, then you've got some problem there if it's hydrophilic. So DMSO, again, another kind of all-round general carrier molecule for bringing substances into circulation through the skin. So it's a good topical. You could combine chrysin with DMSO. And then another compound, diindolmethane, or indole-3-carbinol, helps shift estrogen metabolism. It wasn't particularly strongly endorsed by Dr. Pete, but people I know on the forums and that had mentioned things like DIM.
I just think it's not that it's not super effective. A lot of people eat broccoli and kale, and they get plenty of diindolmethyl, but it's just not a super strong estrogen blocker.
So let me mention nettle root. So it modulates sex hormone binding globulin, allowing more free testosterone to be available and not blocked, not bound. And then it's also an aromatase inhibitor, preventing that conversion into estrogen, which is what you don't want. And then calcium D-glucarate promotes estrogen clearance via glucuronidation. So calcium D-glucarate could also be looked at. And then caffeine. good old coffee. Enhances liver clearance of estrogen, so stimulates the liver, increases metabolism, increases detox pathways. So vitamin E, caffeine, supporting your liver, low PUFA diet, high calcium, these are all kind of mitigation strategies which could be very useful. And obviously you mentioned raw carrot salad. Not to keep going on about it, but hey, it's one of those things that binds endotoxins and estrogen in the gut. Activated charcoal, he has mentioned that before in the past, intermittent use to bind estrogen and gut toxins. And then a liver supporting diet, so adequate proteins, especially gelatin and collagen, a low PUFA diet, obviously, reducing aromatase and inflammation, high calcium, low phosphate ratio, avoiding cruciferous vegetables. Obviously, things like kale and mustard and things like that are in the crucifer family, like broccoli, Brussels sprouts. So they definitely have their benefit, but he wasn't super big on it. But he would always talk about kale, and he'd talk about spinach being well cooked, and principally the liquor being used rather than the vegetable.
Well, some people can have thyroid suppression from eating too much cabbage and kale and all those crucifer vegetables. The drug that is used for thyroid overdose is actually exactly the same thing that's in cabbage. So when you eat these foods, you don't want to be juicing raw kale and raw broccoli, because you have a lot higher levels if you cook them well and you don't eat them every night of the week. They can be incorporated into a healthy diet.
Okay, so enhancing thyroid function then is another strategy. T3 obviously is a synthetic thyroid. It's not something that you can manufacture yourself unless your thyroid is really working well and you're producing lots of T4 and you're not blocking it with reverse T3.
And your liver's healthy to convert the completely inactive T4 to the active T3.
So natural desiccated thyroid is another alternative. It's not synthetic, it's a natural product, but is subject to a fair amount of variability. It raises metabolism, lowers estrogen, lowers prolactin, lowers serotonin, increases your metabolic rate, and can be part and parcel of improving your DHT to estrogen ratio. Okay, and then progesterone and pregnenolone. So progesterone is a fairly strong aromatase inhibitor, it's anti-estrogenic, supports DHT indirectly, and pregnenolone improves GABA tone, improves mood and supports healthy steroid balance. And Dr. Peep described progesterone as the most anti-estrogenic hormone. Okay, so I think we've gotten pretty close to wrapping that up. It is 10 to the hour, 10 to 8. So if anybody wants to call in with any questions, the number is 707-923-3911. And this is Ask Your Herb, Dr. KMUD Galville, 91.1 FM. And we will be back third Friday of the new year, 2026. Can you believe it? If we don't get anybody calling in at this point in time, I wanted to take a quick look at the phytochemistry of a plant I don't think I covered. It's one of those herbs that was a male herb. I'm pretty sure I didn't cover it, but it's Epimedium corianum, otherwise known as horny goatweed.
I think you did discuss it in the early part of this series.
Did I?
Briefly.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, I thought it warranted a little bit more discussion, just because of some of the compounds that have been isolated from it have had quite a lot of work done researching them, isolating them specifically, and the work seems to be fairly promising for being an androgenic and enhancing sexual function. So phytochemistry then of Epimedium corianum, otherwise known as horny goatweed. Icarin is the major compound that's used as a marker of authenticity of this product in the trade. It's a prenylated flavanol glycosin, so Icarin, Icariin. It also has icaritin and epimedin A, B, and C, and desmethyl icaritin and sagittatoside. So these are the main compounds for which have been isolated from this particular plant that have got its activity. It's a mild phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitor, It also enhances nitric oxide-mediated vasodilation. But Dr. Peat, again, he was not supportive particularly of nitric oxide. I know Viagra acts on nitric oxide to produce vasodilation and erection, and he was never supportive of it, and said that Viagra was definitely responsible for more than one heart attack in male patients using it.
Well, it also, if you look at it, how it naturally occurs in the body, it can also be termed an inflammatory mediator. Mm-hmm. It's released in response to injury in your cuts, in your wounds, and so it is quite inflammatory as a substance to be taking.
So it essentially upregulates nitric oxide synthase within the tissue. So it also has neural nitric oxide synthase activity. So it upregulates the ability to produce this, and then it increases circulating testosterone in animal studies. Possibly they are positing this as a potential hypothalamic pituitary gonadal stimulation. And it has potential indirect effects on DHT by raising testosterone substrate. So this can be used also in terms of male health and testosterone viability. It could also enhance DHT production by itself. I think we have a caller on the air.
Yes, and it's an odd question, so I will ask it for her.
Oh, okay.
They want your tangerine or Seville orange marmalade recipe, please.
I don't know if it would take more than we've got time for. Sarah, what do you want to say about it?
Yeah, I
it's
can give
a 3-day process for sure.
I can give a basic rundown, but you have to soak the seeds in boiling water to extract the pectin the first day. Obviously, you juice the oranges and then extract the pectin from the seeds, and then you chop up all the peel and soak that with the juice, and then the second day you boil all of that. After you get the pectin out of the seeds, you throw the seeds away, and you boil all of that for like an hour. Then you let that all soak for another day, and then the next day you add the sugar, and you boil that down to your desired
consistency, right?
Yeah, level of
and darkness,
thickness is what I'd say. And if you go too long, it does start caramelizing the sugar and makes a very dark marmalade.
Which is not what you want. If you want a yellow, more orange marmalade,
you don't boil it so long.
Less
but
oxidation.
I think one of the reasons Seville oranges are used for marmalade is because they have so many seeds, and that's where a lot of the pectin comes from. So it makes a very thick preserve.
Plus the fact it's a very bitter orange too. Okay, so looking back at horny goatweed again, as I said, it upregulates endothelial nitric oxide synthase. It increases circulating testosterone and also has a potential indirect effect raising DHT by increasing testosterone substrates. It has a pretty good osteoprotective effect on bones. Now, it stimulates the osteoblastic activity, which is the bone building side, and suppresses the osteoclast differentiation. So there's a system called the RANKL OPG system. So this is modulated by epimedium, which reduces bone resorption and increases bone mineral density in postmenopausal osteoporotic models. Icarin, again, has neuroprotective effects. It shows dopaminergic and neurotrophic effects. It increases brain-derived natriuretic peptide expression. It improves memory and learning in animal models of Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, and it has antioxidant and anti-apoptotic effects on neuronal tissue. Lastly here, the immunomodulatory and anti-inflammatory effects. It suppresses the well-known nuclear factor kappa beta signaling, decreasing pro-inflammatory cytokines like TNF, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and interleukin-6. And the polysaccharides that stimulate macrophage and lymphocyte activity has also been well documented as a quote-unquote immunotonic. Anyway, just wanted to mention horny goatweed. A while ago when I'd heard about it, I'd never really looked at it. I never was that interested in it. It always sounded a bit gimmicky to me. But looking potentially at Icarin, and the other metabolites having their physiological effects does seem to warrant using it in a in a real context of being very helpful. So, third Friday of next month, I think we're going to be looking at pregnancy.
We've had several requests to speak more about pregnancy.
Yeah. Okay, so my name's Andrew Murray.
My name's Sarah Johannesson Murray.
For all of those who've listened to the shows, third Friday of every month from 7 till 8 p.m., we still very much we still very much follow Dr. Pete's rationale for all those things that he'd ever spent all of his time on. And also want to make sure that people can find us on the internet. Our web address is westernbotanicalmedicine.com. We are also found on Twitter. We have an archive of all the radio shows that we have all of them that we ever did. I have all of them that we ever did. There's probably 40 or 50 of them, at least on the website. So if people want to look and listen to anything Dr. Pete had to say, just listen to the wisdom of the man who found that in late 2019 that the whole coronavirus thing actually was not originating from here, but that's not from Wuhan, but actually was part and parcel of a experiment gone wrong. Anyway, so he had it right from the very beginning, just like so many other things like supporting saturated fat, supporting sugar, talking about progesterone, demonizing estrogen, progesterone favoring, etc., etc. So we're carrying on his legacy, and just like that in my practice, that's what I do when I see patients, and I very much steer them the same way, and been manufacturing herbal medicines for the best part of 25 years now, and practicing for longer than that. So until the third Friday of January 2026, Merry Christmas to you all and a Happy New Year.
Thank you for listening. Good night.
This program is copyrighted. All rights are reserved. Reproduction in whole or in part without the express prior written consent of the owner is prohibited.